Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Shelby and today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in January and all the books I want to read in February. So in January, I read 8 books. I read 6 ebooks and 2 physical books. In total, I read 2,846 pages, and I'm quite honestly surprised that I was able to read that much this month. I definitely did not think that January would be my big reading month because of my trip, but you know, I underestimated how much time I would spend on planes and by the pool and on buses. So I actually got a lot of reading done, which makes me really happy and just gives me a good start to the year. Since we have quite a few books to get through, I thought we could just start right now with the first book that I read in January and the first book that I read in 2022, Echoes and Empires by Morgan Rhodes. I gave this book 3 stars. It was a perfectly okay fantasy to start the year. This book follows Jocelyn, who is a spoiled socialite living in a world where magic and kind of modern technologies have been blended. Think an urban setting with magical qualities, but in this world, magic has been banned. It is strictly forbidden, but one day, Jocelyn is caught in a robbery gone wrong where she is unintentionally infected with magic. So now she has to work with the thief to get the magic out of her before it is too late. While this book wasn't life-changing or memorable, I had a lot of fun while reading it, which I think is a really important quality in the book. I thought the characters were interesting. I liked how bold Jocelyn was. She was very take no shit. She wasn't afraid to kind of be a little bit spoiled or a little bit of a brat, and she knew what she wanted and she went after it. But also there was this kind of inner conflict, this struggle of, you know, knowing that people were talking behind her back and always that kind of thought that she wasn't good enough for her position. So I really liked that kind of internal character struggle we saw in her. I thought the magic system was interesting. Kind of how magic works in this world is very different from other fantasy books I've seen before. And I think that the mystery that kind of left off at the cliffhanger was really intriguing, and I'd be interested to kind of read the next book and see where the author decides to take this. So while it wasn't anything like amazing, I definitely want to continue the series just so I can see where these characters go, because I had a lot of fun while reading it. So the next book that I read in January was To Love Jasonthorne by Ella Mays, and I gave that book 4 stars. In this book, we follow Olive, who is a romance author, and her book is being turned into a movie, and to her surprise, her childhood friend Jason Thorne has been cast as the lead actor, and what Jason doesn't know is that Olive actually based the love story and the romance on him and her from when they were younger. I went into this book knowing very little besides that plot line, and I was really pleasantly surprised by this entire story. This book is chock full of romance tropes, from fake dating to brother's best friend, the list goes on. I loved Olive and Jason's relationship. I thought they were full of chemistry, and I loved seeing their banter back and forth with each other as they both kind of struggled to act on their feelings. Jason Thorne, our romantic interest, was really sweet, but he was also extremely sexy, honestly. He has some really nice dirty talk thrown in there, and their chemistry just it came through the page. I also really loved Olive's friendship with her best friend Lucy. If I could bottle their friendship, I 100% would. It was absolutely adorable, and I think the next book in the series follows Lucy and someone else. So I definitely want to check that out because Lucy was just such a fun character in this book, and I'm curious to see, you know, getting to see her perspective in the next book. I think it'll be really fun. As much as I loved this book, there definitely were, you know, some problems. I found that some of the lines were extremely cheesy, and there were some scenes that bordered on the creepy, stalkery side, but overall this was a really fun romance that, you know, just kind of gave me a break after the fantasy I had just read. So if you are looking for a new hot romance, I definitely recommend this one. Next up, we have Deal with the Elf King by Elise Kova. I ended up giving this book only 2 stars. I went into the story knowing that it probably wouldn't be the best writing, but you know, sometimes romantic fantasies are like that. The writing and the plot and the storylines aren't amazing, but you fall in love with the characters and the world. But this book, however, did not do that for me. I know people who have loved this book and who have hated it. I unfortunately erred on the side of hating it. So in Deal with the Elf King, we follow Luella, who has always wanted to be a healer. She is trained as such, and she just wants to be there to help the people in her village. Unfortunately, her village lies closest to the Veil, which is this mystical mist that separates the elf and supernatural kingdom from the humans. Every 100 years, some of the elves come into the human world to select a wife for the elf king to help strengthen the bonds of magic between Earth and the magical creatures. Luella has never displayed any types of magic, so she thinks that she is too old to be selected, but alas, when the elf king comes to take his bride, she is the one who is selected. So now she must journey to the elf kingdom and help them restore this bond of magic. But the magic is fading, and she and the elf king will have to work together in order to find a more permanent solution. One of the reasons I didn't like this book as much as I thought I would is because there were too many slow scenes. I felt like some of the chapters were so information heavy, I kind of just had to trudge through them to get to the actual plot and intrigue of the book. I also found the magic system of this world very confusing. I don't think it was explained in a way that made sense to me. I just felt that there was so much mythology and background, I got lost in the influx of information. This is a problem I have with a lot of standalone fantasy books. I find it really difficult for some authors to, you know, incorporate all of this fantasy magic and history into one book. And I've only read a few books that I feel do that well, but this definitely was not one of them. On to the next book I read in January. It was The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang. This book came out last April and I just haven't had a chance to pick it up, and I finally did, and I gave it 4 stars. I love Helen Hoang's writing. I love her romances. This is the 3rd book in her Kiss Quotient series. It is absolutely amazing. Each book follows a different couple, and one thing that I love about Helen Hoang's romances is that there's always some kind of disability represented in the romance. So in this case, we have a love interest who is on the autism spectrum. That representation is made all the more meaningful when you learn that Helen Hoang herself, I believe, is also autistic or somewhere on the autism spectrum. So you know that she's really writing from a place of, you know, knowledge about the topic, and she incorporates it into her romances and relationships really well. After I read this book, I looked at some of the criticisms about it, and people were a little put off by the fact that this book had more to do with the main character's individual journey and growth as opposed to hardcore romance like some of Helen Hoang's other books, but I really loved that aspect. As someone who wants to work with kids who are on the autism spectrum or who have different cognitive disabilities, I really enjoyed watching our main character's growth from beginning to end and kind of watching her learn to accept her new diagnosis, because this is someone who received that diagnosis much later in life and has less time to kind of deal with that fact. So I really appreciated it. I didn't even tell you guys what this was about. So this book follows Anna Sun, who achieved internet fame from her beautiful violin performance, and she has been struggling ever since that video went viral to kind of achieve it again, and she has found that she can't play music because she is unable to convince herself that she can be as good as she was in that one moment. On top of dealing with that very annoying fact, her boyfriend has decided to tell her that he would like to see other people before he fully commits to her. So to get back at him, she decides to embark on a one-night stand, and that is where she meets Quan Deep. And even though their first attempt at a one-night stand does not work and their second attempt at a one-night stand doesn't work, they find that they are spending time together not just because they want to sleep together, but because they actually enjoy each other's company. And this is about their journey, finding each other and finding themselves. Unlike the other books in this series, this book is actually written in first person as opposed to third person, and Helen Hoang Huang tells us in the author's note that that is because this is the book that she relates to the most. This is the character that she relates to the most. So she decided to write it in first person, which I thought was so cool. This book deals with a lot of heavy topics such as autism, burnout, generational trauma, even loss of a loved one. And those aren't things that you see generally explored in romance books, but I think that Helen Huang did it really, really well. As sad as I am that this series has kind of come to its conclusion, I'm really looking forward to see what Helen Huang is going to write next. On a very different note, the next book I read in January was The Zodiac Academy: The Awakening by Caroline Peckham and Suzanne Valenti. This book has been all over Book Talk, Bookstagram, BookTube, just the book community as a whole seems obsessed with this series. However, there does seem to be a general consensus that the first book in the Zodiac Academy series is not as good as the rest of them. So it's very strange to go into a book series knowing that the first book you read you are not going to enjoy as the rest. You know, it makes you filter everything through that kind of negative lens. This follows a set of twins, Darcy and Tori, and they are kind of pulled from their very mundane life when they are told that they are heirs to this Zodiac throne, but in order to claim their heritage, they have to attend the Zodiac Academy and learn magic and kind of declare a certain house within the Zodiac Academy. So they agree to go through this process and are immediately bullied / harassed by the other students, specifically the 4 heirs, which are 4 boys who, before the girls had come back into this magical realm, they were the ones who were going to be ascending to the throne. So now that the sisters are back, the sisters are in line for the throne, so these 4 boys are a little ticked off. It is a bully romance, so if that is something you are not a fan of, this may not be the book for you, though I found that the bully aspects were a little bit less so in this book. I don't know if I just was kind of desensitized to it or not. I'm not sure, but this book has a lot of information being thrown at you, so that's probably one of the reasons people don't love it as much. It's a lot of context for the world that you are kind of being thrust into. I found that I only really started to get into the story when I was at about the 65% mark in the book. The most confusing thing for me personally was the switch of point of view throughout the book. We would often get Darcy's POV and then Tori's POV, but honestly, at the beginning, the sisters were so similar, I could not tell it apart. I was having a really hard time differentiating between the 2 perspectives, and yes, that got easier as time went on, but that was definitely hindering my understanding and enjoyment of the book at the beginning. I did enjoy the idea of this fantasy world, even though it was a lot, and I really enjoyed seeing one of my favorite tropes, which is the bully romance, in a fantastical setting. I think this book ended with just enough mystery and intrigue for me to want to continue the series, so that is definitely something I am looking forward to reading throughout 2022, because I feel like there's like a bunch of books. I think they might be past like 7 or 8 right now. I don't know. I know there's a ton of books in the series, so I'm excited to get through them this year. The next book I read is The Offlimits Rule by Sarah Adams, and I gave this book 4 stars. Sarah Adams is an author I discovered last year. I've only read one other of her books called The Cheat Sheet, which was definitely a favorite of mine for 2021, and I picked this one up because I was like, okay, I liked this book. I know I like her writing and her narrative voice, so I picked up The Offlimits Rule, and I also really enjoyed this one. In this book, we follow Lucy, who is a single mom who is kind of down on her luck, forced to move back in with her brother, and there she meets her brother's best friend, who is Cooper, and Cooper's kind of a playboy, but he really has this desire to settle down and have an actual relationship, and they kind of collide, but Lucy's brother Drew puts an off-limits rule on both of them, so they kind of have to figure out how to be in this relationship when one of their best friends and brother do not approve. I feel like my description made no sense there, but I hope you kind of understand what I'm talking about. I really did enjoy this book. I loved Lucy's personality. It was so vibrant and happy, and I loved watching her interact with her son. This book was fast-paced, but chock full of action for our couple, Lucy and Cooper. The attraction and chemistry between them was palpable, and they both love Drew, but you know, they're kind of forced with this dilemma that they also are starting to develop feelings for each other, and a lot of this book is them wrestling with that dilemma. It definitely was an interesting obstacle for them to work through throughout the book, and I also loved seeing Lucy as a mother contrasted with her desire to figure out how to exist outside of that mother role, because Lucy is only, I think, 28 in this book, and she kind of has to balance, you know, being in her 20s and being a responsible mom, and I think that theme was also really well explored throughout the books. So I loved the Offlimits Rule. I loved Sarah Adams' writing once again, and this is just another author I am really looking forward to reading throughout the next year. The next book I read in January was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by She Who Must Not Be Named. This obviously was a reread for me. I was kind of feeling some nostalgia at this point in the month, so I went back to a book that always, you know, gave me such comfort, and I don't think I have read this series in 2 years, which is probably the longest break I have taken from the Harry Potter world, so it was really fun to come back to it. It just always astounds me how a book that is filled with so much love and acceptance could be written by an author who has demonstrated that she does not have those qualities. Even at 21, this story just resonates with me on a core level. I feel a part of myself in every single character that shows up in the book. Rereading this book honestly feels like coming home, and I just love that feeling. I'm not sure if I'm going to reread the rest of the series this year, but it's definitely something that I want to do, so we'll see if I get to any other Harry Potter books throughout 2022. The last book I read in January, and also my favorite book that I read in January, was The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axio. I gave it 5 stars. This was actually an arc provided to me by the publisher and by NetGalley, so it is set to release on February 22nd, 2022, and I am so excited for you guys to get your hands on it this coming month, because it was really just such a magical story that was chock full of Korean mythology and fantastical moments that kind of reminded me of Elizabeth Lim's writing. The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea follows Mina, whose homeland has been ravaged by storms and hurricanes because of the sea god's wrath. Every year, her village chooses a maiden to be the sea god's bride and sacrifices her to the ocean. To save her brother's true love, Mina sacrifices herself to the ocean, but once entering the realm of the gods, she realizes that things are different than they first appeared. Magical is quite honestly an understatement when it comes to describing this book. I was absolutely enthralled by the characters and the different locations that you get to explore throughout this story. While there were definitely times I had difficulty making sense of what was happening, that part was overshadowed by my pure joy while reading this book. This is a standalone fantasy, and I think that it did so much better than deal with the Elf King. You really got a sense of the world and the magic and the characters throughout this book, and it was just such a magical story. I absolutely adored it, and it was by far my favorite book of the month. So those were all the books that I read in January. Now we're going to move on to the books that I would like to read in February. Here I have 4 books to share with you. I am hoping to only buy 1 book this month to read, but that is also an anticipated release. If you cannot guess what it is House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. I am not quite sure as to the plot of the book. I haven't really looked at it. I just know that I loved the first book and I'm excited to get the second, but that is the only book that I am, as of right now, planning to purchase and read in February. To prepare myself for that, the first book that I'm planning to read in February is House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I have not read this book since its release in 2020, so my goal is to kind of read this book once again to remind myself of the characters and the plot lines so that I am prepared to read the second book in the series when it releases on February 15th. For those who have been living under a rock, House of Earth and Blood is a new series by Sarah J. Maas in which we follow Bryce Quinlan, who is a half-fae living in the ultra-modern city of Crescent City, and when her best friend is murdered, she is asked by the police force to team up with this fallen angel named Hunt to solve the murders. I loved this book. I am so excited to reread it, and I'm so excited to get my hands on the new one. If you guys thought that book was big, you are going to be doubly impressed with me when I tell you that I also plan to read Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff this month. This is a monstrosity. I'm not actually sure of how many pages this is. I think it's close to 800 pages. And this is a stunning copy. It is the Barnes & Noble exclusive edition. So you have some really beautiful illustrations inside the cover. And this is J. Kristoff's new book. I loved his writing in Nevernight and Illumini, so I know I like his storytelling ability. I know this is kind of this epic fantasy following the last of the vampires, I believe. I have heard nothing but good things about this book, and I'm excited to dive into this whole ass world this month. Hopefully I will get to it. I'm just really excited to read it. The next book I hope to read in February is Jade Fire Gold by June C.L. Tan. This is the Fairy Loot edition, so you have some beautiful spine art as well as some embossing on the cover and inside the cover art. It is just such a beautiful copy, and the description reads, "In an empire on the brink of war, An is no one with no past and no family. Altan is a lost heir, his future stolen away as a child. When they meet, Altan sees in An a path to reclaiming the throne. An sees a way to finally unlock her past and understand her lethal magical abilities. But they may have to pay a far deadlier price than either could have imagined." This just looks so magical and cool. I love the colors on the cover, and this is just another one I'm really excited to read. The final book I would like to get to in the month of February is Year of the Reaper by Makia Lucier. This one is another Fairy Loot edition, as you can tell by these sprayed edges, and I believe this also has some inside the cover art and embossing. I am also going to read you guys the description of this one. It says, 3 years ago, Lord Cassia disappeared in the midst of war on a mission entrusted to him by the king. Since then, a devastating plague has swept the land, leaving countless dead and the kingdom forever altered. Having survived a rotting prison cell and a merciless illness, Cass, now 18, wants only to return to his home in the mountains and forget past horrors. But home is not what he remembers. His castle has become a refuge for the royal court, and they have brought their enemies with them. When an assassin targets those closest to the queen, Cass is drawn in to search for the killer, one that leads him to form an unexpected bond with a brilliant young historian named Lena. Cass and Lena soon realize that who is behind the attacks is far less important than why. They must look to the past, following the trail of a terrible secret, one that could threaten the kingdom's newfound peace and plunge it back into war. This just looks like another epic fantasy. I am so excited. I love that we are following more a male perspective than a female. I feel like in a lot of young adult fantasy books, we follow a woman who makes a connection with a man and they have an adventure together. And I kind of like how in this book, the roles are reversed. So this is also one I am so excited to sink my teeth into. Poof, that was a lot, but those are all the books that I read in January and all the books I would like to read in February. If you guys have made it this far in the video, please be sure to comment down below a little stack of books to show me you've made it to this point. And yeah, if you guys liked this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Hit the notification bell to get updates on when I post. I post every single week, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!